I held a dying creature in my arms that wasn't from this world, and the last thing it showed me before it vanished was the face of Christ. But not the Christ I'd been taught to believe in. What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you think you know about faith, about creation, about humanity's place in this vast cosmos. And I need you to hear this, all of it, because if what happened to me on that frozen October night is true, then everything changes. Everything. Before we begin, I want to know, where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let me know what city, what country. And if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain, something that shook the foundations of what you believed was possible, share that too. Subscribe if you want to hear more, because this story doesn't end where you think it will. And please, share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone in questioning, in doubting, in wondering if there's more to this reality than what we've been told. Now let me take you back. It was 2:47 in the morning, mid-October, and I couldn't sleep. That wasn't unusual. Sleep had become a stranger to me in the 3 years since I'd buried my wife. The house was too quiet, too full of absence, and most nights I'd find myself standing on the back porch of my ranch in rural Montana, 40 miles from the nearest town, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hands while I stared at nothing. My name is Samuel Bridger. I'm 58 years old. I used to be a veterinarian, spent 30 years of my life saving animals, stitching wounds, easing pain, delivering calves in the middle of winter storms. But after Margaret died, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't look into the eyes of a suffering animal and promise the owner everything would be okay, because sometimes it's not okay. Sometimes you pray and you beg and you bargain with God, and the thing you love most in this world dies anyway, and all your faith turns to ash in your mouth. So I retired, sold the practice, moved out to this isolated piece of land where I could be alone with my bitterness and my unanswered questions. The Bible Margaret had given me on our 20th anniversary still sat on my nightstand. I hadn't opened it in months, maybe longer. What was the point? I prayed every prayer I knew when she was dying, recited every verse about healing, about faith, about God's goodness, and she died anyway, slowly, painfully, while I held her hand and felt my faith drain away with every labored breath she took. That night, the night everything changed. It was cold. First real frost of the season. The kind of cold that makes the air feel brittle, like the world might crack if you move too fast. The stars were out, brighter than I'd seen them in years, almost aggressive in their clarity. I remember thinking they looked closer somehow, like they were pressing down on the earth, watching. I was on the porch in my flannel robe and boots, no coat, letting the cold punish me a little. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a meteor, a streak of light across the northern sky, brilliant white with a blue edge, moving fast. But then my brain caught up with my eyes and I realized the movement was wrong. Meteors fall. They arc and burn and follow predictable paths governed by gravity and physics. This thing was moving horizontally, then adjusting, correcting its trajectory like something was piloting it. And it was coming down fast. The impact happened maybe half a mile away, out in the far pasture near the tree line. I felt it through the porch boards beneath my feet. A tremor. A deep subsonic boom that resonated in my chest. My cattle started bellowing in the near field, panicked, and I could hear my dogs barking frantically from the barn. For maybe 30 seconds I just stood there, coffee cup still in my hand, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My rational mind was throwing up explanations. Military aircraft, experimental drone, some kind of satellite debris. But none of those explanations fit what I'd seen. The way the thing had moved, the light it had given off, the controlled descent followed by the impact, nothing about it was right. I should have called someone. Sheriff's department, maybe, or even the Air Force Base 3 counties over. That would have been the sensible thing to do. But I'd been living alone for 3 years, and somewhere in that isolation I'd lost the instinct to reach out, to involve others. And there was something else, too. A pull, almost magnetic, drawing me toward that impact site. Curiosity, maybe. Or maybe just the first thing in 3 years that had penetrated the numbness I'd wrapped around myself like a shroud. I went inside, put on a heavy coat, grabbed a flashlight from the mudroom. Didn't bother with my phone reception out here was worthless anyway. Then I climbed into my truck and headed across the property, following the fence line toward the northern pasture. The drive took maybe 10 minutes, bumping over frozen ruts, my headlights cutting through darkness that seemed thicker than usual, more resistant to light. As I got closer, I could see a glow on the horizon, orange and blue, pulsing slightly, like something was burning but not consuming itself. The air started to smell wrong. Metallic, sharp, with an undertone of something organic that I couldn't place. It reminded me a little of the smell of a cauterized wound, but sweeter, stranger. I parked at the tree line and got out. The temperature had dropped even further, my breath coming out in thick clouds. But ahead of me the air shimmered with heat. The trees nearest the impact were bent away, their branches blackened but not burned through. The ground was scorched, in a perfect circle, maybe 40 feet across. The grass incinerated down to bare earth that looked almost glazed, like it had been subjected to incredible heat for just a fraction of a second. And in the center of that circle was the craft. I'm going to try to describe it, but understand that my mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't like anything I'd seen in movies or imagined in speculation. It was maybe 15 feet long, smooth and elongated. But the surface seemed to shift between metallic and something more organic, like chitin or mother of pearl. There were no seams, no obvious windows or doors, no markings, and it was damaged. A long split ran down one side, edges peeled back, and from that wound a blue-white luminescence pulsed weakly, like a heartbeat that was failing. I approached slowly, my veterinary training kicking in despite my fear. I'd spent decades reading the signs of trauma, assessing the severity of injuries, and even though this was beyond anything in my experience, some part of my brain was already categorizing, evaluating, trying to understand the extent of the damage. That's when I saw it. Him. The being. It was collapsed half out of the split in the craft, partially visible in the pulsing light. My first impression was humanoid. 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head, but everything was wrong. The proportions were off, limbs too long and too slender, the torso too narrow. The skin, if you could call it that, looked like a membrane, translucent and luminescent, and beneath it I could see what might have been organs or energy centers, glowing in patterns that shifted and dimmed. It wasn't moving. As I got closer, maybe 10 feet away, I could see that whatever this thing was, it was dying. The light beneath its skin was fading, flickering like a candle in wind, and there was fluid silver blue and luminescent pooling beneath it, soaking into the scorched earth. I should have been terrified. Any sane person would have been. But I'd spent 30 years approaching injured animals, creatures in pain who might lash out or flee, and that old instinct overrode my fear. And maybe there was something else, too. A recognition that in this moment, confronted with something impossible and dying, I had a choice. I could turn away, protect myself, deny what I was seeing. Or I could do what I'd spent my life doing. I could try to help. I took another step forward, and that's when its eyes opened. I can't describe them adequately. They were large, too large for the head, and they had no whites, no pupils in the human sense. Just depth, like looking into wells of light that went down forever. And they looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me, with an intelligence and awareness that was unmistakable. My heart hammered in my chest. My hands were shaking. But I didn't run. The being moved slightly, a tremor running through its form, and it lifted what I understood to be a hand, 3 long fingers, and what might have been a thumb, the digits too articulated, too delicate. It reached toward me, not threatening, but imploring. And in that moment, standing in that circle of scorched earth with a dying creature from somewhere beyond my comprehension, I made a decision that would change everything I thought I knew about the universe, about God, about the nature of reality itself. I knelt down in the frozen dirt beside it and said, "Okay, I've got you. Let me see what I can do." Its hand, I'm going to call it a hand, touched my wrist, and I felt something pass between us. Not words, not language, but meaning. Pure and direct, bypassing my ears and arriving fully formed in my mind. Help, time. Short. The veterinarian in me took over. I assessed quickly, massive trauma, systems failing, but the anatomy was so far beyond my understanding that I had no reference points, no idea what was vital, what could be stabilized, what was already too damaged to save. The luminescent fluid was still leaking from wounds I couldn't see, and the light beneath its skin was dimming faster now, pulsing erratically. I looked back at my truck, then at the being. It was too fragile to move roughly, but I couldn't treat it here in the open, in the cold, with no tools, no shelter. I had to make a call. "I'm going to carry you," I said, not knowing if it could understand my words but hoping the intent would translate. "I have a place, medical supplies. I can try to help you there." Another pulse of meaning, yes. Hurry. I slipped my arms beneath it. God, it was light, so much lighter than it should have been for its size, like it was mostly hollow or filled with something less dense than flesh, and I lifted it as carefully as I could. Its head lolled against my shoulder, and I could feel heat radiating from its form, fever hot, burning through my coat. The walk back to the truck felt like it took hours. Every step I was terrified I'd jar something vital, cause more damage, but the being didn't make a sound, just pressed closer against me, its strange fingers gripping weakly at my coat, and I could feel that pulse of light against my chest, getting weaker, slower. I managed to get the passenger door open and settle it across the bench seat, then drove back to the house faster than I should have, bouncing over ruts that made me wince every time the being's body shifted. My old veterinary clinic was in the barn. I'd kept all the equipment when I retired. Couldn't quite bring myself to sell it off or pack it away. The exam table was still there, the cabinets still stocked with supplies. I pulled the truck right up to the barn doors, carried the being inside, and laid it as gently as I could on the stainless steel table. Under the fluorescent lights, I could see it more clearly, and the sight made my breath catch. It was beautiful and terrible at once. The membrane skin showing intricate patterns of light beneath, like constellations or neural networks, all of it fading. The wounds were more extensive than I'd thought. Not cuts or burns, but something deeper, like the very structure of its being was coming apart. I grabbed bandages, antiseptic, anything I could think of, but when I tried to apply them, they wouldn't adhere. The being's skin was too smooth, too unlike any tissue I'd ever worked with. I tried to clean the luminescent fluid away, but it evaporated as soon as it left contact with the being's body, turning to vapor that smelled like ozone and something floral I couldn't name. I was losing it. This creature, this impossible thing, was dying on my exam table, and I had no idea how to save it. That's when it reached up and took my hand. Another pulse of meaning, stronger this time, more urgent. Touch here. It guided my hand to a point on its chest, just left of center. I pressed where it indicated, and I felt something, a flutter, a resonance, like touching a tuning fork that was vibrating just below the range of hearing. My own heart seemed to synchronize with it, and suddenly I was aware of energy moving through my hand, out of me, into the being. It was draining me, pulling life force or bioelectricity or something I had no name for, but it was working. The light beneath its skin steadied, brightened just slightly. "What are you?" I whispered. The being's eyes opened fully, fixing on mine, and for the first time I felt something like speech, though it never moved what I assumed was a mouth. "Witness, keeper, observer." "You came here," I said, still pressing my hand to its chest, feeling my own energy flowing out. "You crashed here. Why?" "Looking. For proof." "Proof of what?" The being's hand moved to cover mine, and I felt a flood of emotion that wasn't my own: wonder, fear, desperate hope. "That you exist, that it happened, that the impossible is true." I didn't understand. My head was swimming, exhaustion from the energy drain starting to make my vision blur at the edges. "That what's true? What are you talking about?" The being's grip tightened on my hand, and its voice, that voiceless voice in my mind, grew softer, weaker. "The death. The resurrection. The moment that changed everything across all of creation. I came to find evidence that it was real." My breath stopped. "You mean—" "Yes. Your Christ. Your God who died. Show me. Show me your book of testimony." And that's when it hit me, what this creature was asking for. The Bible. The book one hadn't opened in months. The faith I'd abandoned, the God I'd decided had abandoned me. This being from the stars, this dying, impossible thing on my veterinary table, wanted to see the gospel. I pulled my hand away, stumbling back, and immediately its light began to dim again. "I can't," I said. "I don't. I stopped believing. When my wife died, when God didn't answer, I stopped." The being's eyes followed me, and what I felt from it wasn't judgment, but something closer to compassion. "Bring the book, please, before one fail completely. Let me show you what I traveled so far to confirm." My legs felt weak, my whole world was tilting, but I found myself nodding, turning toward the barn door. "I'll get it," I said. "Just hold on. Stay with me." It took everything I had not to collapse as I walked across the yard to my house. The Bible was exactly where I'd left it, on the nightstand, dust on the cover. Margaret's inscription was still visible on the inside page. "To my Samuel, may you always remember that love never fails." I'd read those words at her funeral and felt like a liar. Now, carrying that book back to the barn, back to the dying alien on my exam table, I had no idea what I believed anymore. I pushed open the barn door. The being turned its head toward me, its light so faint now I could barely see the patterns beneath its skin. I held up the Bible. "I have it." "Good." The voice in my mind was barely a whisper. "Now I will show you what I came so far to see." It raised one hand toward me, those long fingers extended, trembling with effort. "Touch me again, and see what lies beyond what you have been taught." I should have hesitated, should have questioned. But something in me, the part that had knelt beside this creature in the first place, the part that had chosen to help instead of hide, made me step forward. I placed my hand against its chest again, and the barn dissolved into light. The light didn't blind me. That was the first strange thing. It should have. It was brilliant, white gold and all-encompassing, erasing the barn walls, the exam table, the concrete floor beneath my feet. But instead of overwhelming my senses, it clarified them. I could see more, not less. I could see through layers of reality I hadn't known existed. I was still aware of my hand pressed against the being's chest, could still feel that pulse of energy flowing between us. But now it wasn't draining me. It was connecting us, linking our consciousness in a way that let me perceive what it perceived, know what it knew. The being was still there beside me, but different now, stronger, more vivid, its form more defined. The membrane skin had become almost translucent, and I could see the complexity within, not organs in any biological sense I understood, but structures of light and energy. patterns that moved and shifted like living circuitry. "What is this?" I said, and my voice sounded strange, distant, and close at the same time. "This is how I see, how my kind experience reality. I have brought you partially into my perception so you can understand what I must show you." "Your kind," I repeated. "What are you? Where do you come from?" The being, I still didn't have a name for it, just that impression of witness, keeper, observer, turned what served as its face toward me, and I felt, rather than saw, its response. "We are old. Older than your species by millions of your years. We were made early in the unfolding of creation, crafted by the same hand that formed you, but given a different purpose. You were made to live, to choose, to love and suffer and die and be reborn. We were made to watch, to record, to bear witness to what happens across the vastness of space and time." The light around us shifted, and suddenly I could see them others like the being beside me, scattered across distances I couldn't comprehend. Thousands of them, maybe millions, each one stationed near worlds where life had emerged, where consciousness had evolved, where the Creator's hand had touched and shaped and breathed purpose into matter. "Your angels," I whispered. The being made a sound that might have been a laugh, though I heard it only in my mind. "No, not angels. Angels are different beings of pure spirit, not bound to form as we are. We are witnesses, observers. We watch and record the great works of the Creator across all of creation. And we have seen much, but we have never seen anything like what happened here, on Earth." My heart was racing. "What do you mean? What happened here?" The being's light pulsed, and I felt its excitement mixed with something like fear. "First, you must understand the pattern. Let me show you what we have witnessed across 10,000 worlds." The light shifted again, and I wasn't in the barn anymore. I was suspended in space, real space, cold and vast and impossibly ancient. But I wasn't afraid. The being's presence was beside me, supporting me, keeping me safe as it showed me what it had seen. I watched worlds form, not the way scientists describe it, with dry mathematics and geological epics, but as it actually happened: intention becoming matter, word becoming flesh, consciousness preceding and shaping physical reality. It was beautiful beyond anything I'd ever imagined, chaotic and ordered at once, violent and gentle, each world a unique expression of the same creative love. And on some of those worlds, not all, but many, life emerged. I watched it happen across millions of years, compressed into moments, single cells becoming complex organisms, consciousness dawning like sunrise, intelligence flowering into self-awareness and choice, and the capacity to reach toward something greater than themselves. "How many worlds have life?" I asked. "Countless." The being's voice was filled with wonder. "More than you could visit in 1,000 lifetimes. And on many of these worlds, the Creator does something extraordinary." "What?" "The incarnation events." The light showed me another world, one I'd never seen, orbiting a star whose light was more orange than yellow. On this world, there was a species not human, but sophisticated, social, capable of philosophy and art and worship. And into this world the Creator came, took form, walked among them, taught them, showed them the nature of divine love through direct experience. I watched as this being of light, this manifestation of God, lived among the alien species, healed their sick, challenged their corrupt religious systems, called them to a higher way of living. And then, when the time was complete, this divine manifestation ascended, returned to the source, leaving the species transformed, elevated, awakened to their true purpose. "Jesus," I breathed. "You're showing me Jesus, but not on Earth." The being's presence pulsed with affirmation. "Yes, the pattern repeats. Not on every world, only on those that have reached a certain threshold of development, where the inhabitants are ready to receive direct revelation. On dozens of worlds we have witnessed this. The Creator takes form, enters the creation, teaches, transforms, and returns. It is beautiful. It is the way the universe works, the way love reaches across the gap between infinite and finite. So Earth wasn't special, I said, and I felt a strange disappointment. We weren't unique. It happened everywhere. No, Samuel. The being turned its full attention on me, and I felt the weight of its urgency. This is what you must understand. This is why I came to your world. Because Earth is different. What happened here broke the pattern, changed everything. The scene shifted, and now I was seeing Earth. My Earth. Ancient Judea, a small backwater province of the Roman Empire, politically insignificant, culturally marginal, and walking through it, teaching in synagogues and healing the sick and gathering disciples, was Jesus of Nazareth. It looked like all the other incarnation events I'd seen. The same pattern, God taking flesh, demonstrating love, calling people to transformation. I'd grown up with this story. Sunday school had drilled it into me. What made this different? Watch. The being's voice was tense. Watch what happened that should never have happened. I watched Jesus' ministry unfold, the miracles, the teachings, the growing conflict with religious authorities. I watched him gather his disciples, feed the multitudes, calm the storms. And then I watched as the opposition hardened, as the plot formed, as the betrayal happened. I'd seen depictions of the crucifixion before, paintings, movies, passion plays, but this wasn't a depiction. This was the real thing, unfiltered, and it was so much worse than any artistic interpretation had ever captured. The brutality of it, the humiliation, the physical agony that went on for hours while he hung there suffocating, drowning in his own fluids, every breath a battle against collapsing lungs and pierced tissue. I wanted to look away, but the being wouldn't let me. You must see. You must understand what happened here that made Earth different from every other world. And then Jesus died. I watched the moment, saw the exact second when the life left his body, when the presence that had animated that flesh withdrew, when the divine spark extinguished. And the universe screamed. I don't know how else to describe it. In that moment of death, something rippled outward from Earth, from that cross, from that broken body, a shock wave that traveled not through space, but through the fabric of reality itself. It passed through me, through the being beside me, through every dimension and timeline and possible world. I felt it in my bones. A wrongness, a break in the fundamental order of things. Because on every other world where the Creator had taken form, there had been teaching and ascension. But here, on Earth, God had died. The being's light was pulsing frantically now. Colors I had no names for cascading through its form. Do you understand? On every other world, the divine visited and taught and returned unharmed. But here, the inhabitants killed their God. And in that death, something changed across all of creation. We felt it. All of us, scattered across countless worlds. We felt the pattern break, felt something impossible happen. But he rose again, I said, my throat tight. 3 days later, the resurrection. That's the whole point of Christianity, that death couldn't hold him. Yes. The being's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Yes. And that is what I came to confirm, because the resurrection was even more impossible than the death. The scene shifted again, forward 3 days to the tomb. I watched the stone roll away, watched the light that was somehow flesh and somehow more than flesh step out into the dawn. But I wasn't just watching it from a historical perspective. The being was showing me what it had witnessed from a cosmic perspective, from outside of time. The moment Jesus rose from the dead, another shock wave rippled outward. But this one was different. Where the death had been a breaking, a wound. This was a mending, but a mending that changed what it repaired. Reality itself was different after that moment. The laws that had governed death, that had made it permanent and final, were rewritten. I saw the ripple pass through world after world, through the network of witnessing beings that observed all of creation, and I felt their shock, their confusion, their wonder as they realized what had just happened. Death, the one universal constant, the one thing that claimed every living being across every world, had been defeated. Not avoided, not transcended, defeated, conquered from the inside, by a God who had subjected himself to it and then broken it from within. "We didn't know it was possible," the being said, and for the first time I heard emotion that I could name in its voice: awe, mixed with something like fear. "We thought we understood the rules of creation. We had watched it unfold for eons. We knew the patterns. But this rewrote everything. Your world, this insignificant little planet on the edge of a minor galaxy, became the center of the greatest mystery in all of creation. The place where death died." I was shaking. The barn had returned around us, or maybe we'd never left it, but I was on my knees now, my hand still pressed to the being's chest, tears streaming down my face. "Why?" I choked out. "Why Earth? Why us? What made us so important that God would do that here and nowhere else?" The being's light was fading again, the effort of showing me this vision draining what little life it had left. "We don't know. That is the great mystery. We have debated it among ourselves for 2,000 years of your time. Some say it is because humanity's capacity for both cruelty and love is uniquely intense. Others say it is because Earth exists at a crucial juncture of dimensional realities. Still others believe it was random choice, that any world might have been selected and Earth simply happened to be the one. But the truth is, we don't know. We only know that it happened, that here on this world the pattern broke and was remade into something new." "And that's why you came here," I said, "to confirm it was real." "Yes, because some of us doubted. The event was so unprecedented, so impossible, that some of my kind began to question whether we had witnessed it correctly, whether our observations were flawed. I volunteered to come here, to investigate, to find whatever physical or spiritual evidence remained of what happened 2 millennia ago." "Did you find it?" The being's light pulsed once, weakly. "Yes. It is everywhere. In the bones of the earth where his blood soaked into the ground, in the faith of those who still believe without having seen, in the changed nature of death itself. I can see it now. Here, in this dimension, death is no longer a wall. It is a doorway, and it was opened by what happened on that cross." My mind was reeling. Everything I'd been taught in Sunday school, everything I'd dismissed after Margaret died, all of it was crashing back together in new configurations. The story I'd thought I knew, small, provincial, one religion among many, was actually cosmic in scale. The event I'd reduced to personal salvation was something that had shaken the foundations of reality across the entire universe. "My wife," I said suddenly, urgently. "Margaret. When she died, I prayed. I begged God to save her. But she died anyway, in pain, afraid. I thought God had abandoned us, abandoned me." The being's eyes fixed on mine, and I saw compassion there that was almost unbearable. "Your God did not abandon you. But you must understand the gift that was won on that cross was not the elimination of death. It was the transformation of death. She died, yes, but death is no longer what you think it is. Not anymore. Not since the resurrection. Show me," I begged. "Please. If you can show me anything else before you." I couldn't finish the sentence. The being trembled, its light flickering like a candle in strong wind. "I can show you, but it will cost me the last of what I am. To take you to the threshold between life and death, to let you see what lies beyond it, will require all my remaining energy. I will not survive it. No, I said. I won't let you die for me, not for this. The being's hand covered mine, and I felt warmth, affection, something almost like a smile. You already chose to help a dying stranger from the stars. Why would I not choose to help you? And perhaps I came here not just to confirm the resurrection, but to experience what it opened. My kind observe death, Samuel, but we do not die as you do. We fade, we diminish, but we are not offered what you are offered. Redemption, transformation, the hope that lies beyond the doorway. Its voice was getting weaker, the words forming more slowly in my mind. Let me do this. Let me show you where your wife has gone. And in doing so, let me pass through that doorway myself. Let me experience the gift that your Christ won for all embodied beings. It is the only way I will ever know if what I witnessed was not just true, but good. I looked at this being, this ancient witness from the stars who had come so far to verify a story I'd stopped believing, and I realized it had more faith than I did. It believed enough to die for the chance to experience what Jesus had made possible. How could I refuse? "Show me," I whispered. "Show me where she is." The being's light flared one last time, brilliant and terrible, and I felt it pulling both of us toward something vast and close and impossibly near. The barn dissolved again, but this time we weren't going out into space. We were going deeper, into the thin places, the boundaries, the threshold between life and whatever comes after. And there, in that liminal space where death meets life and the doorway stands open, I saw her. Margaret. She wasn't a ghost. That's the first thing I need you to understand. What I saw wasn't some translucent apparition, some pale echo of the woman I'd loved and lost. Margaret was more solid, more vivid, more alive than she'd been even in the healthiest days of our marriage. The cancer that had hollowed her out, turned her skin gray and her eyes dim, was gone. She looked the way she had when we first met, young and radiant and full of a joy that seemed to come from somewhere deep and inexhaustible. We were in a place that wasn't a place. I can't describe it better than that. It had no walls, no sky, no ground beneath our feet, yet I felt stable, oriented. There was light everywhere, but it didn't come from a source. It simply was, emanating from the air itself, or from some dimension that overlapped with wherever we were standing. And the temperature was perfect, that precise point between warm and cool, where you forget you have a body, where physical sensation becomes irrelevant. Margaret stood maybe 20 feet from me, and she was smiling, not at me. She seemed to be looking at something beyond me, something I couldn't see, and her expression was one of pure wonder, like a child seeing the ocean for the first time. I tried to move toward her, but the being's presence held me back. Its voice in my mind was strained, weakening with every second. "You cannot cross fully. You are still alive. This is the threshold, only the boundary. She cannot hear you speak, but she can feel your presence, and you can receive what she wishes you to know." "Margaret," I said anyway, knowing she couldn't hear me but unable to stop myself. "God, Margaret, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry I stopped believing. I'm sorry I've been so angry. Samuel." The being's voice cut through my spiral. "Be still. Receive." And then I felt it. Not words, not even thoughts exactly, but pure meaning flowing from her to me across that impossible distance. Impressions, emotions, truths that arrived in my consciousness fully formed, bypassing language entirely. The first thing I felt was her love. It hit me like a wave, so strong it nearly knocked me over. Not the diminished, exhausted love of those final weeks when pain had consumed everything, but the full force of 30 years of partnership, companionship, shared joy and sorrow. It was all still there, undimmed, undiminished by death or separation. The second thing I felt was her peace. Complete, absolute peace. The fear that had gripped her in those final days, the terror of the unknown, of leaving me behind, of the pain that was coming, all of it was gone. She existed in a state of such profound tranquility that even feeling the edge of it from where I stood made my own anxiety begin to dissolve. And then came the message she wanted me to understand. And it arrived not as sentences, but as layered truth, multi-dimensional meaning that I'll have to flatten into words that can't possibly capture it fully. She was trying to tell me that she'd tried to reach me. In the weeks after her death, in the months of my grief and anger, she had been there, trying to make me understand that she was okay, that she hadn't ended, that the thing I was mourning wasn't the reality of where she was. But I'd been so deep in my pain, so wrapped in my bitterness toward God, that I couldn't perceive her. My grief had been like static, drowning out every signal she was sending. I felt her frustration, not at me, but at the limitations, at the difficulty of communication across that threshold, and I felt her understanding, her compassion for my suffering, because she'd carried her own suffering through those final weeks and knew how it could blind you to everything else. But more than anything, I felt her trying to tell me that it wasn't an ending. That word ending didn't apply to what had happened to her. It was a transition, a doorway, exactly as the being had said. She'd passed through something, not into nothing. And on the other side was more reality, not less. More consciousness, more awareness, more life, just in a form I couldn't perceive from where I stood. How? I choked out. How is this possible? How are you still you? The being's voice answered, since Margaret couldn't, because of what happened here, on Earth, 2,000 years ago. Before the resurrection, death was a wall. Consciousness ended, the self dispersed, there was only the long sleep and the distant hope of eventual restoration at the end of all things. But when your Christ broke death from the inside, he changed its nature, made it a doorway instead of a wall. Now, for those who pass through it in him, there is continuity. The self persists. Love persists. All that is good and true and real about a person continues, purified, perfected, made more fully itself than it ever could be while trapped in failing flesh. I was sobbing now. Great heaving gasps that shook my whole body. The being's form beside me was flickering, its light growing dimmer with every passing moment, but it held us there in that threshold space, letting me receive everything Margaret was trying to give me. And what she was trying to give me was permission. Permission to let her go. Permission to stop carrying the guilt. Permission to live again, to find joy again. To open that Bible on my nightstand and discover that the story I thought I knew was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than I'd ever imagined. She was telling me that my prayers hadn't been unanswered. They'd been answered in ways I couldn't see, couldn't accept. I prayed for her healing, and she had been healed, just not how I'd demanded. Not by staying in her cancer-riddled body, but by being released from it into a state of wholeness I couldn't comprehend. I'd prayed for her suffering to end, and it had ended. I prayed for God to save her, and he had saved her from the diminishment of disease, from the fear of annihilation, from the horror of ceasing to exist. My prayers had been answered. I'd just been too blinded by my own vision of what the answer should look like to see the answer that came. I didn't understand, I whispered. I thought God abandoned us. Abandoned me. Another wave of meaning for Margaret, and this one was almost amused. Gentle correction. The way she used to correct me when I was being stubborn about something obvious. The sense of it was clear. How could God abandon you when God died for you? How could God be absent when God subjected himself to the very death you feared and broke it open from the inside? And underneath that, another truth. I had abandoned God, not the other way around. In my pain, I'd turned away, shut the Bible, stopped praying, wrapped myself in isolation and bitterness, and God had let me, had given me space for my grief, had waited patiently for the moment when I'd be ready to turn back. This moment. This impossible night when a dying being from the stars showed up to remind me what I'd forgotten. The being's light pulsed weakly. Samuel, I cannot hold this space much longer. You must return, and I must go forward. No, I said, panic rising. Not yet. Please. Just a little longer. The being's presence wrapped around me, and I felt affection there and also finality. This is enough. You have seen what you needed to see. You know now that she continues. That love continues. That death is not the end, but the doorway that was opened for you. For all of you. Now you must return and live with this knowledge. And I must discover what lies beyond the doorway for one such as me. Will I see you again? I asked, looking at Margaret. But the question was for both of them. The being's answer came soft and certain. If what your scriptures say is true, then yes. All things will be restored. All that was broken will be mended. All that was separated will be reunited. We will all stand together in the full presence of the Creator, and there will be no more boundaries, no more thresholds, no more need for witnesses, because all will see clearly. Margaret's form was beginning to fade, or maybe we were being pulled back, away from that threshold space, but before she disappeared completely, I felt one last pulse of meaning from her, and this one was the clearest of all. Live, Samuel. Don't waste the time you have left. Live fully. Love again. Let yourself be human again. That's what this gift was. For not so you could avoid death, but so you could live without being controlled by the fear of it. And then she was gone. And the threshold space was dissolving, and I was being pulled rapidly backward, back through layers of reality, back toward the solid world of matter and time and consequence. We slammed back into the barn with a physical shock that drove the air from my lungs. I was on my knees on the concrete floor, my hand still pressed to the being's chest, but now the connection between us was weakening, fraying. The being's light was almost gone. Just the faintest luminescence remained, pulsing irregularly, like a heartbeat that was losing its rhythm. The silver-blue fluid was leaking from it again, pooling on the exam table, and its form seemed less solid, as if it was becoming translucent, fading not just in brightness but in substance. I pressed my hand harder against its chest, as if I could pour my own life back into it. But I knew it was futile. It had spent everything to show me what I needed to see. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why did you do that? You said it yourself, you didn't have to die this way. You could have faded slowly, peacefully. Why spend everything to show me her? The being's eyes opened one last time, and I saw depths in them I hadn't noticed before. Not just intelligence, but soul. Whatever these beings were, they weren't just biological machines designed for observation. They were persons, individuals, capable of choice and sacrifice and love. Because its voice was barely a whisper in my mind now. Because I have observed for so long, witnessed so much, recorded endless data about the nature of love, of sacrifice, of faith. But I never experienced it, never participated. We were made to watch, not to live. A pause, its light flickering dangerously. But your Christ showed another way, showed that the highest form of existence is not observation, but participation. Not recording love, but embodying it. And I wanted, before I fade completely, I wanted to know what it feels like to give yourself for another, to die in hope of resurrection, to trust that the doorway leads somewhere beautiful. Tears were streaming down my face. You had faith, more than I did. Not faith. Curiosity, hope, the desperate wish that what I witnessed was not just true, but good. And now I will know. Because I am dying here, on earth, where death was transformed. And if your scriptures are right, then what waits beyond the doorway is open even to one such as me. A witness who finally stopped watching and started living, even if only for one night. I don't even know your name, I said. The being made that sound that might have been a laugh. My name is not sounds your throat can make. But if you must call me something, call me what I became tonight. Call me friend. Its light was fading faster now, the pulses growing further apart, weaker. I could see through it to the exam table beneath. It was dissolving, its molecular structure coming apart, returning to whatever elemental state beings like it came from. Will it hurt? I asked. I don't know. Another pulse, fainter. But I am not afraid. I saw what waits. Through your wife's eyes, through your Christ's promise, I saw that love continues. That is enough. What should I do? The question burst out of me, desperate. After you're gone, what should I tell people? How do I tell them? The voice was almost gone now, just the faintest impression. Tell them what you saw. Not that we exist, they will not believe that. Tell them that everything they hoped was true is true. Tell them the universe is not cold, not empty. It is watched over. It is loved. And death is not the end. It is the doorway that was opened for them. For all of them. Friend, I said, the word strange in my mouth. Thank you. The being's light pulsed one final time, bright and beautiful, and I felt its presence wrap around me in something like an embrace. Thank you for helping, for staying, for witnessing my witness. Now I go through the doorway, and I will see what your Christ won for all who die in hope. And then it was gone. The light didn't go out gradually, it simply ceased, like a switch being flipped. One moment the being was there, translucent but present, and the next there was nothing on my exam table but a faint shimmer in the air that smelled like ozone and flowers. Even the silver-blue fluid had evaporated, leaving no trace. I knelt there on the concrete floor of my barn for a long time, my hand still extended toward where the being had been, my whole body shaking with emotions I couldn't name. Grief, wonder, fear, hope, all of it tangled together into something so overwhelming I couldn't breathe through it. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. Outside, the first birds of morning were beginning to call, though the sky beyond the barn windows was still dark. How long had I been in that vision, in that threshold space? Time had become meaningless, elastic, but my watch said it was almost 5 in the morning. Hours had passed. I finally managed to stand, my legs weak, and stumbled to the barn door. The air outside was cold and sharp, clearing my head a little. Dawn was just beginning to touch the eastern horizon, turning the sky from black to deep blue. The stars were fading, but I could still see them, thousands of them, millions, scattered across the vast emptiness of space. Except it wasn't emptiness not anymore. Now I knew what was out there. Witnesses, observers, ancient beings scattered across the galaxy, watching and recording and marveling at what had happened on this insignificant planet. They'd seen it, all of them. They'd felt the shockwave when Christ died and when he rose again. They knew, and one of them had come here to verify it, to investigate, to find proof that the impossible thing was real. And in the process, it had given me back something I'd thought was lost forever, my faith. Not the simple, uncomplicated faith of my childhood. Not the easy certainty that if you pray the right words, God will give you what you want. But something deeper, bigger, more solid. The faith that comes from seeing death face to face and discovering it's not what you thought. The faith that comes from witnessing a being from the stars die in hope of resurrection. The faith that comes from feeling your dead wife's love still reaching across the boundary to tell you she's okay. She's whole, she continues. I walked back toward the house as the sky lightened, and when I opened the door, the Bible was still sitting on the kitchen table where I'd left it before carrying it to the barn. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it, Margaret's inscription still visible on the inside cover. To my Samuel, may you always remember that love never fails. I carried it to my chair by the window and opened it. My hands were shaking. I didn't know where to start, what to read, so I let it fall open randomly. The Gospel of John, Chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. I read it slowly, and for the first time in 3 years I understood what I was reading. Not just intellectually, but with the kind of knowing that comes from experience. The Word that created all things, I'd seen it. I'd watched creation unfold at that word, watched galaxies form, watched life emerge on countless worlds. The light of all mankind, I'd seen that too. Seen how it had entered the world, taken flesh, died and risen again, sending ripples through the fabric of reality itself. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. No, I whispered to the empty room. It hasn't. The days that followed were strange. That's the only word I have for them. Strange in the way that everything looked the same but felt completely different. Like I was seeing the world through new eyes, or maybe seeing it clearly for the first time after years of looking through fog. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Who would I tell? The sheriff? My neighbors, 40 miles away? The pastor at the church I hadn't attended in 3 years? I could already imagine their faces, the careful concern, the suggestions that maybe I should talk to someone, that grief does strange things to people, that isolation can make you see things that aren't there. But it had been there. The being friend, I called it now in my private thoughts, had been real. The craft had crashed in my pasture. I'd carried an alien creature to my barn and watched it die on my exam table. And in the process, it had shown me things that changed everything I thought I knew about the universe, about God, about the nature of reality itself. The evidence was gone, of course. I'd walked out to the crash site the morning after, once the sun was fully up, and found nothing but scorched earth. The perfect circle was still there. The grass burned away, but the glazed quality I'd seen in the dark was gone. It just looked like a spot where maybe someone had lit a bonfire. The craft had vanished completely, dissolved like its pilot, leaving no trace. No metal fragments, no strange materials, nothing that would prove anything had happened. In the barn, the exam table was clean. No silver-blue luminescent fluid, no residue, no sign that anything unusual had occurred there. If I hadn't had the memories burned into my brain, I could have convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. But I hadn't dreamed it. My body knew that. I was exhausted in a way that sleep didn't touch, drained from whatever energy transfer had happened when I tried to help the being. And my heart knew it. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for 3 years, the grief, the bitterness, the sense of abandonment had lifted. Not disappeared, but transformed into something I could carry without being crushed by it. I started reading the Bible again. Not with the desperate hunger I'd had when Margaret was dying, searching frantically for verses about healing and miracles, and not with the angry resentment I'd felt afterward, looking for someone to blame for prayers that seemed to go unanswered. I read it now the way you'd read a letter from someone you'd misunderstood, trying to hear what they were actually saying instead of what you'd assumed they meant. And what I found there astonished me. The cosmic scale of it. The hints scattered throughout Scripture that this story was bigger than one planet, one species, one moment in time. In the beginning was the Word, and through him all things were made. Not just Earth, all things. Every star, every galaxy, every world where the witnesses observed and recorded. All of it spoken into existence by the same creative force that had walked the dusty roads of Galilee. For God so loved the world. But which world? Just Earth? Or did that word carry a weight I'd never considered? All the worlds, the whole cosmos, the entirety of creation. And if the resurrection had sent shock waves through reality itself, changing the nature of death everywhere, then maybe the gift won on that cross wasn't just for humanity. Maybe it was for everyone. Everything. All beings capable of love and choice and death. I thought about Friend, about its species of ancient witnesses who'd observed but never participated, about how it had chosen to die here on earth, in hope that the doorway opened by Christ's resurrection would be available even to beings like them. Had it worked? Was Friend even now on the other side of that threshold, experiencing the reality it had only observed before? I wanted to believe it was, needed to believe it. A week after the encounter, I drove into town. First time in months. I needed supplies, needed to show my face so people wouldn't worry, needed to start the process of rejoining the human race after 3 years of self-imposed exile. The general store was the same as always, warm and cluttered, smelling of coffee and sawdust. Mrs. Topian Patterson behind the counter gave me a careful smile, the kind you give someone you're not sure about. "Samuel Bridger," she said. "Haven't seen you in a while. You doing okay out there?" "I'm doing better," I said, and realized it was true. Been going through some things, thinking a lot, but I'm better now. She studied my face, and something in her expression softened. "You look better." "Less," she paused, searching for a diplomatic word. "Less dead," I offered, and she laughed, surprised. "Well, yes, actually. You look like you're living again instead of just going through the motions." I bought my supplies and was loading them into the truck when I saw Pastor Jim crossing the street. He'd officiated Margaret's funeral, had tried to visit me several times in the months after, but I'd turned him away each time. He hesitated when he saw me, clearly unsure if I'd want to talk. I surprised both of us by calling out to him. "Pastor, got a minute?" He came over, relief and wariness mixed on his face. "Samuel, good to see you in town." "I want to come back," I said, "to church. This Sunday, if that's okay." His eyebrows went up. "Of course it's okay, you're always welcome. But forgive me for asking what changed. Last time we talked, you were pretty clear about being done with faith." I looked up at the sky. Bright blue, cloudless, the kind of autumn day that makes Montana feel like the most beautiful place on earth. And I thought about what was beyond. That blue, the stars I couldn't see in daylight, the ancient beings watching from distances I couldn't comprehend, the cosmic story that was so much bigger than I'd ever imagined. "I had an experience," I said carefully. "Can't really explain it, but it reminded me that the story is bigger than my pain, bigger than my questions, bigger than what I can see or understand. And I realized I'd rather live inside that mystery than outside it." Pastor Jim nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's what faith is. Not having all the answers, but trusting that the story is bigger than our chapter of it." "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, exactly." Sunday came. I put on clothes that weren't work jeans and a flannel shirt, drove the 40 miles to the little church on the edge of town, and walked through doors I hadn't entered in 3 years. People looked at me surprised, curious, some of them clearly concerned, but I ignored the looks and found a seat in the back. The service was familiar and strange at once. The same hymns I'd sung since childhood, but now the words hit different. Amazing grace. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Yes, exactly that. How great thou art, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made. all the worlds. Did the person who wrote that line know how literal that was? How many worlds God's hands had made, scattered across impossible distances, each one watched over, each one loved. Pastor Jim's sermon was about doubt, about Thomas refusing to believe in the resurrection until he could touch the wounds, see the evidence with his own eyes, and about how Jesus didn't condemn him for it, didn't reject him for needing proof, just showed up and said, "Here, touch and see, be transformed from doubter to believer." I felt tears on my face and didn't bother wiping them away. Friend had done the same for me, shown up in my isolation, my doubt, my anger at God, and instead of condemning me, had given me proof. Let me see Margaret beyond the threshold. Let me witness the cosmic scope of what Christ had done. Transformed me from bitter doubter to what? I wasn't sure yet. But something new, something that could hold both the questions and the faith, the doubt and the wonder, the grief and the hope. After the service, people came up to me cautiously, offered welcomes back, asked how I was doing, didn't push when I gave vague answers. Mrs. Patterson hugged me, which surprised me. "We missed you," she said simply. "Glad you came home." Home. I'd been so focused on the cosmic, the universal, that I'd forgotten the local, the immediate, the community of broken people trying to live out an impossible story. This was home, too. This little church on the edge of a small town in Montana. These people who'd known Margaret, who'd brought casseroles after her funeral, who'd given me space when I needed it and welcomed me back when I was ready. The weeks passed. I fell into a routine reading scripture in the mornings, working the ranch during the day, attending church on Sundays. I started having conversations with Pastor Jim over coffee, not about what had happened. I still couldn't bring myself to tell that story, but about faith, about doubt, about how to hold on to hope when everything seems dark. "You're different," he said one afternoon about a month after I'd started coming back. "I don't know what happened to you, Samuel, but something fundamental shifted. You used to have all the answers, back before Margaret got sick. Every theological question had a neat response, and then when she died, it was the opposite. Everything was wrong, nothing made sense. God was either absent or cruel. But now you're somewhere else entirely." "Where's that?" I asked. He thought about it. "In the mystery, I guess. You seem comfortable not knowing everything, but also certain about the important things. Like you've seen something that put everything in perspective, but you can't quite explain what you saw." He was closer to the truth than he knew. Winter came. The first snow fell in November, blanketing the ranch in white silence. I stood on the porch one evening, watching the flakes drift down through the darkness, and thought about Friend, about its final moments, the light fading from its form, as it spent everything to show me Margaret, to take me to the threshold between life and death. About its hope that the doorway opened by Christ would be available even to beings like it. I wondered if it had been afraid in those last moments, or excited, or both. I wondered if it had found what it was looking for on the other side, and I realized I'd changed how I thought about death. It was still sad, the separation, the grief, the empty space left behind was all still real. But it wasn't final, wasn't the end. It was exactly what Friend had called it, a doorway. And Margaret had gone through that doorway ahead of me, and Friend had followed, and someday I would too. And if the promise was true, if the resurrection really had changed everything the way I'd seen it change everything, then we'd all be together again. All of us. Everyone who trusted that the doorway led somewhere good. That thought, that hope, made everything bearable. Christmas approached. The church was planning a service, and Pastor Jim asked if I'd be willing to do a reading. I agreed before thinking about it, then realized what I'd committed to. Standing up in front of people, reading scripture, being visible in a way I hadn't been in years. The passage he gave me was from John's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 1 through 14, the same passage I'd read that first morning after Friend died, when I'd opened the Bible with shaking hands and tried to understand what had happened. I practiced reading it aloud in my empty house, my voice echoing off the walls. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. Through him all things were made. I'd seen that, watched worlds form at that creative word, watched life emerge across distances humans had barely begun to explore. All of it made through that same Word that had become flesh and walked among us. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth, made his dwelling among us. On earth, yes. But Friend had shown me other worlds where the divine had taken form, had dwelt among other species, taught them, elevated them, the pattern repeated across creation. But only here had the divine died. Only here had death itself been conquered. Christmas Eve came. The church was packed, candles glowing, the smell of pine from the tree in the corner mixing with old wood and candle wax. When it was time for my reading, I stood and walked to the front, the Bible heavy in my hands. I looked out at the faces, neighbors, friends, people I'd known for decades, people who'd watched me lose my faith and somehow, mysteriously, find it again. And I thought about what Friend had told me to do. Tell them. Tell them that everything they hoped was true is true. Tell them the universe is not cold, not empty, that it is watched over, loved, that death is not the end. I couldn't tell them about the alien that crashed in my pasture. They wouldn't believe that, but I could tell them the truth that the alien had confirmed. I read the passage, my voice steady and clear, and when I got to the final verse, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. I looked up from the page and added something that wasn't in the text but felt true, felt necessary. That really happened, I said quietly. It wasn't a metaphor or a myth or a nice story we tell ourselves. The Creator of everything, all the stars, all the vast distances, everything we can see and everything we can't, took flesh and walked on this earth, lived among us, died for us, rose again and changed the nature of death itself. And that means everything. Everything. There was silence in the church. Then Pastor Jim smiled and said softly, "Amen. Amen." The congregation echoed. I returned to my seat, hands shaking slightly, and realized I was crying. Not sad tears, not even happy tears exactly, just tears of relief, of release, of finally being able to say out loud what I'd been carrying inside for months. After the service, people lingered, talking in small groups, drinking cider and eating cookies. I was heading for the door when a young woman stopped me. I recognized her vaguely. Sarah something, worked at the diner in town. "Mr. Bridger," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. That thing you said. About it really happening. About it meaning everything. Do you—" She paused, struggling. "Do you really believe that? Because I want to. I've wanted to for a long time. But I don't know how to get from wanting to believe to actually believing." I looked at her young face, the hope and doubt mixed there, and I thought about how to answer. I thought about Friend, about the threshold between life and death, about Margaret still existing in joy and wholeness. And I thought about how desperately the world needed people to know this was real, this was true, this changed everything. "Yeah," I said, "I really believe it. Not because someone told me to, or because I was raised to, or because it makes me feel good. I believe it because I've seen evidence. Not the kind I can show you, but the kind that changes you from the inside. And I believe it because the alternative that this is all there is, that death is the end, that the universe is cold and empty and meaningless. That alternative is a lie. I've seen too much to believe that lie anymore." She nodded slowly. "How do I see evidence like that, you ask?" I said. "You open yourself to the possibility that it's true, and you ask to be shown, and then you pay attention. Because the evidence is everywhere, once you start looking. In every act of selfless love, in every moment of beauty, in every time someone chooses sacrifice over selfishness, it's all pointing to the same thing, that there's more going on than what we can see with our eyes, that the universe is watched over, that we're loved, that death is not the end." She smiled, uncertain but hopeful. "I'll try that. Thank you." I watched her walk away, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The sense that maybe my experience wasn't just for me. Maybe I'd been shown what I'd been shown so I could tell others. Not the fantastical details that no one would believe, but the essential truth underneath it all. That hope is real. That faith is rational. That the story we've been told about God becoming flesh and conquering death isn't wishful thinking. It's the most true thing in the universe. I drove home through the snow, the road familiar even in darkness, and when I got to my ranch I stood on the porch and looked up at the stars. They were brilliant tonight, cold and distant and beautiful. And I thought about the witnesses out there, scattered across the galaxy, observing and recording. Friends, people. Were they watching Earth now? Had they felt it when friend died here? Had they recorded what happened when one of their kind chose participation over observation, chose to trust the promise of resurrection enough to die in hope of experiencing it? I liked to think they had, liked to imagine them looking at Earth with new eyes, seeing not just the planet where the impossible resurrection happened, but the planet where one of their own had found courage to step through the doorway, where observation had finally given way to faith. "I hope you made it," I said to the stars, to friend, to the darkness that wasn't really darkness at all. "I hope the doorway was open for you. I hope you found her there, on the other side, and she could tell you what I couldn't, that it's beautiful, that it's real, that love continues. I hope you know now that everything you witnessed was not just true, but good. So good." The wind picked up, and snow swirled around me, and I stood there in the cold and felt a peace so profound it was almost tangible. The grief was still there. I still missed Margaret, still felt the ache of her absence. But the grief was held now inside something bigger, something strong enough to carry it without being crushed. Hope. Faith. The certainty that what had been separated would be reunited, that what had been broken would be mended, that death was not the wall I'd thought it was, but the doorway it had been made to be. I went inside, made coffee, opened the Bible to John's Gospel again. Read the story of the resurrection, of Mary at the tomb encountering the risen Christ, the part where Jesus says her name Mary, and she recognizes him, realizes that death had not taken him, that love had proven stronger than the grave. I thought about how Margaret had tried to say my name in those weeks after her death, tried to reach across the boundary to tell me she was okay, and how I'd been too deaf with grief to hear her. But I heard her now, finally, and I heard friend's final message, too. Tell them everything they hoped was true, is true. So I'm telling you that I saved a dying alien from the stars, and in return it showed me Jesus. Not the small, domesticated Jesus of Sunday school, but the cosmic Christ whose resurrection sent shock waves through the fabric of reality itself. It showed me that death is not the end, that my wife still exists, still loves, still waits, that the universe is not cold or empty, but watched over by ancient witnesses who marvel at what happened here, on this insignificant planet where God chose to die and death itself was defeated. I can't prove any of this to you. The evidence vanished with friend's body, dissolved into light and air and memory. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that everything changed for me that October night when I chose to help instead of hide, to participate instead of observe, to trust that love was stronger than fear. And now, when I look at the stars, I don't see emptiness. I see witnesses. I see friends, people, watching and recording and marveling at the impossible thing that happened here. And I know they're not alone out there. I know they're watched over by the same love that watched over me, over Margaret, over every human who's ever lived and died and hoped there was something more. There is something more. I've seen it. And that changes everything. Everything. Everything.